It seems that England can be recognized from a few frames: a red bus by Big Ben, a cup of tea in the rain, an old pub, a green hill, and a person who apologizes even if you stepped on their foot. But behind this postcard lies a country where rules are often more important than words. History lives alongside modernity, and an ordinary trip to the store can cost more than a tourist expected. Today, we will set off for the real England, not the country from a promotional brochure, but a place where perfect manners coexist with a cold queue, ancient castles with expensive rent, and a quiet country road can lead to one of the most congested cities in Europe. We will break down why England is constantly confused with Great Britain, how the habits of apologizing and queuing formed here, why football is perceived almost as a family religion, what the English actually eat, who owns the swans on the Thames, and why life in London forces you to count every pound. And at the end, we will see what remains of the English dream when the tour is over and you need to pay for housing, transport, utilities, and an ordinary dinner, because England knows how to look impeccable, but that is precisely why its everyday contradictions are especially easy to overlook. If you like documentary films about real life, unexpected facts about countries, and travel without tourist gloss, subscribe to the channel. And now let's start with a map on which the first confusion is already hidden. England is not all of Great Britain and not all of the United Kingdom. England occupies the southern and central part of the island of Great Britain. On this same island are Scotland and Wales. The United Kingdom includes them, as well as Northern Ireland, located on a different island. For a tourist, the difference may seem a formality, but for residents it is a matter of history, politics, and their own identity. According to the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, tens of millions of people live in England, and it is here that the majority of the population of the United Kingdom is concentrated. It is the most populous and economically powerful part of it, but its geography is not at all like one big London. Between the capital, the industrial cities of the north, university centers, the coast, and the rural counties lies an entire system of different ways of life. In the south, in one day you can see business districts, old cathedrals, and vineyards. In the north, the industrial past has left brick factories, football stadiums, and cities that are searching for their place anew after the closure of factories. Between them are villages, national parks, and roads where distance is measured not in kilometers but in the number of narrow turns and oncoming tractors. To the west, England is washed by the Irish Sea, to the east by the North Sea, and the southern coast faces the English Channel. But the sea here does not mean constant sun and a resort climate. The country lies in a zone where Atlantic air quickly changes the mood of the sky. The Met Office explains British weather by the influence of the ocean, air masses, and terrain features. Therefore, a forecast here is needed not to find out if it will rain, but to understand exactly what hour it will start. In England, you can leave home under bright sun, take shelter from a downpour 20 minutes later, and in the evening discover that the wind has completely changed the temperature. This does not mean that every day here goes through all 4 seasons, but changeability has become part of everyday culture. An umbrella may lie in a bag for years, and a waterproof jacket becomes more important than a beautiful coat. That is why English clothing often seems more practical than a tourist expects. In the countryside, a person chooses shoes that will survive a muddy path. In the city, a coat that can withstand rain and wind. And at a football match, clothing must remain comfortable for several hours straight. Weather imperceptibly dictates the shape of life, even if in a tourist video it is replaced by a sunny shot. But England has landscapes that look as if they were specially created for a screensaver. In the Cotswolds counties, light stone, low walls, and neat villages form an almost theatrical rural scene. In the Lake District, England's largest national park, lakes are surrounded by hills and mountains, and the green color changes along with the clouds and rain. The Lake District National Park describes this region not simply as a beautiful backdrop, but as a living landscape with farms, roads, water, tourist routes, and local communities. Here, nature is not separated from man by glass. Sheep may come onto the road, an old stone bridge remains part of the route, and a popular trail requires respect for the land and the people who work nearby. The south coast gives a completely different image of England. White chalk cliffs, beaches, ports, and windy promenade roads remind that the country looks not only inward, but also toward the continent. On the Jurassic coast, geology becomes almost the main character. Layers of rock tell a story that is older than any castle. Now imagine that all this rural tranquility is just a few hours from the capital, where people go underground to get to work. And the price of a room can determine a career choice. England constantly contrasts a small, beautiful landscape with an immense density of human life. London is usually shown as a set of symbols: red buses, Westminster, Tower Bridge, shop windows, and the Thames. But the real capital begins where the tourist bus route ends. It's the queues at the station, noisy train terminals, small apartments, markets, universities, offices, neighborhoods with different languages, and people who spend hours commuting every day. London is not all of England, but it is so influential that it often overshadows everything else. Here, decisions are made, international companies operate, the largest museums are located, and the cultural industry is concentrated. At the same time, the capital creates a feeling that the whole country lives at one accelerated pace. Although outside of London, attitudes toward distance, work, and free time can be completely different. The London Underground, opened in the 19th century, became the world's first underground railway. Transport for London describes it not only as a transport system but also as a complex urban infrastructure that daily connects districts with different histories and income levels. For a tourist, the line map looks like a colorful diagram. For a resident, it's a route that determines their salary, sleep, doctor's appointment, and rent. In the old tunnels, closed stations remain, and under the streets run riverbeds that were long ago buried underground. But the most impressive underground fact is not in the mysterious tunnels. It is that modern London stands atop layers created by different eras: Roman roads, Victorian utilities, post-war neighborhoods, and new glass towers. Above the city rises the clock tower that tourists call Big Ben, although that name refers to the Great Bell. Nearby is Westminster Abbey, where the history of monarchy turns into architecture. Across the river, buildings linked to finance are visible. And just a few minutes walk away, you can find a market where a vendor speaks to a customer in a language you won't recognize. London's diversity is not a decorative detail. It affects food, music, schools, neighborhoods, and politics. In one district, Indian curry has become part of the everyday city menu. In another, Caribbean music coexists with a British pub. And a third street changes completely depending on prayer times, school schedules, or a football match. And yet, for someone visiting England for the first time, what often sticks in the memory is not the multilingualism, but one short word: sorry. The English apologize when they bump into you, when you bump into them, when they want to get your attention, and sometimes just when they don't know how to start a conversation. It's not always an admission of guilt. Rather, it's a gentle signal. I see that a small inconvenience has arisen between us, and I don't intend to turn it into a conflict. The culture of queuing grew out of the same logic. A queue here is perceived not as a random gathering of people, but as an order that should be clear to everyone. In a shop, at a bus stop, or near an entrance, people may silently track who arrived first. If someone tries to cut in line, the remark is sometimes made very calmly, and that is precisely why it becomes even more unpleasant. Politeness, however, does not always mean directness. An English person might call an idea interesting, and that could mean genuine admiration, cautious doubt, or a very gentle refusal. A tourist has to learn to read not just the words, but also the pause, tone, smile, and whether they offered a next step. I believe English politeness works as a social shock absorber. It doesn't eliminate irritation, doesn't automatically make people kinder, and doesn't solve the problem, but it allows dissatisfaction not to fire off immediately. In a country with a high population density, this is a useful skill. Too many people stand close to each other every day to be constantly picking fights. The same caution is noticeable in dating. There is no single character of an English woman or a universal first date script, but personal space and financial independence are often taken seriously. A meeting at a pub might be short, conversational, and nothing like a romantic scene from a movie. No one is obliged to feign enthusiasm, pay for both, or continue the interaction just because the other person was polite. Splitting the bill on a first date is perfectly normal for many people. This is not necessarily coldness or proof of a lack of romance. Rather, it's a way to avoid turning money into a hidden obligation. A sense of humor, the ability to listen, and the capacity not to pressure are valued more highly. The stereotype of British reserve partly holds true here, but behind it often lies not a lack of emotion, but a habit of not intruding into others' boundaries. In large cities, relationships are closely tied to schedules and housing. Young people may live with flatmates, meet up after a long commute, and plan even a regular dinner in advance. Expensive rent affects not only where one lives, but also when a person can move out from their parents, start a family, or work fewer hours. Therefore, a conversation about family in England cannot be separated from a conversation about the cost of childcare and housing affordability. For some families, this means having children later in life and long-term budget calculations. For others, it means help from relatives, part-time employment, or moving out of the capital. The same country looks completely different for a person who owns their own apartment and for a person who shares a kitchen with 3 flatmates. It is precisely here that the tourist stereotype breaks down especially quickly. An evening group at the pub may seem carefree and lighthearted, but behind it stand rent, work shifts, loans, transport, and the need to book almost everything in advance. English ease is often the result of good organization rather than an absence of problems. In the evening, social life moves to the pub. The pub is not just a place where drinks are sold. In a small town, it can be a canteen, a fan club, a meeting place for neighbors, a venue for a quiz, and the last space where people of different ages still know each other. Here there is an unspoken rule of rounds. If a group orders drinks, participants take turns buying for everyone. One can refuse alcohol, choose a non-alcoholic drink, or simply drink less, but deliberately forgetting one's round is considered awkward. In this tradition, it is not the drink itself that matters, but the memory of reciprocity. The pub shows England better than an ideal photograph of a facade. During the day, a person with a laptop might be sitting there. In the evening, a family. After a match, dozens of fans. Some pubs look like historic interiors with wooden walls. Others have turned into modern restaurants. But the idea remains the same. People come not just to eat, but to be among others. Closely linked to the pub is another English passion: football. The English Premier League has long become a global product, but for local fans, the club remains part of personal history. A team is often chosen not by the league table, but by family, neighborhood, father, grandfather, or the first game a child was taken to at the stadium. Official Premier League materials show the scale of the competition, but the viewing figures do not explain why an adult can remember the lineup of a team from 10 years ago better than their own password. On match day, the pub turns into a small stadium. People argue about the referee, the coach, and transfers, and then the next day they work together again, despite supporting different clubs. At the club level, rivalry can be fierce. At the national team level, a different emotion emerges: the promise that football will finally come home. This expression sounds simultaneously like hope and like a joke about one's own history of disappointments. English football knows how to turn failure into a collective tradition and then sell hope again before the next tournament. But England is not just about football. There is Wimbledon, rugby, cricket, rowing, and a huge number of local competitions. Sport connects people not because everyone is obliged to love the same club, but because it creates a shared calendar. At the weekend, you can discuss a match, the weather, and the result of a neighboring team with a person you have met for the first time. Now, let's take a look into the kitchen, to where the English image often clashes with reality the most. The traditional full English breakfast appeared in a culture where the working day could be long and physically demanding. Sausages, bacon, eggs, mushrooms, beans, tomato, and toast look like a breakfast prepared not for lightness, but for an energy reserve. Today, it is not eaten every day, but it has remained a symbol of how industrial England used to solve a domestic task. Put on the plate everything that would help one last until the evening. Fish and chips tells a different story. Fish and potatoes became a mass urban food that could be quickly bought, wrapped up, and carried away. Today, the dish seems simple, but its popularity is linked to ports, railways, industrial areas, and changes in the ways cities were supplied. On weekends, a Sunday roast with meat, vegetables, gravy, and Yorkshire pudding may appear on the table. Despite its name, this is not a dessert, but a light pastry created to soak up the gravy. And alongside these centuries-old dishes exists the cuisine of migration. Curry, tikka masala, Chinese, Middle Eastern, African, and Caribbean food have long become part of English everyday life. Here is an important paradox. The English love to talk about tradition, but tradition itself constantly changes under the influence of trade, imperial history, migration, and cities. Even a dish perceived as national is often the result of an encounter between several cultures. Food also reveals social differences. One person buys expensive cheese at a farmer's market. Another waits for the evening discount on short shelf-life products. A third cooks a large pot of food for several days. Externally, everyone may talk about the same English breakfast, but their access to ingredients, time, and kitchen will differ. Even the Sunday roast does not always look the same. For one family, it is a home ritual. For another, a rare occasion to gather relatives, and for a third, it is a pub dish that is easier to order than to cook after a work week. The tradition persists not because everyone repeats it identically, but because each person adapts it to their own circumstances. After a hearty breakfast, England offers tea. After tea, the pub. But afternoon tea and an ordinary cup in the office are not the same thing. The ritual of small sandwiches, pastries, and cream grew out of an aristocratic habit of filling the gap between lunch and dinner. Today it can be ordered at a hotel, arranged at home, or turned into a tourist experience, but the idea of a pause remains at its core. Tea here does not always mean calm. It can be a way to get through bad news, start a work conversation, greet a guest, or simply acknowledge that right now, nothing can be rushed. In this sense, tea is not a magical symbol of English elegance, but a small everyday ritual that helps people not to move from one task to another without a break. Another detail that surprises visitors is the two separate taps in older houses. For a modern person, this is inconvenient. Hot and cold water do not mix directly in the sink. But such plumbing is linked to the history of buildings, water supply, and construction standards, not to a desire to deliberately complicate life for a tourist. England often keeps old solutions longer than seems rational because replacing them in every home is far more difficult than inventing something new. The monarchy works the same way. The British crown exists not only in ceremonies, parades, and tourist souvenirs. It is embedded in legal history, architecture, the calendar, and the habit of perceiving the past as an active part of the present. The king does not rule the country directly, but the monarchy remains a symbol around which people argue, joke, celebrate, and discuss national identity. One of the strangest traditions involves the swans on the Thames. The royal household describes swan upping, the annual census and marking of swans, which is historically linked to the crown's rights over these birds. Today, it is no longer a medieval control over a food supply, but a ceremony during which the condition of the population is monitored and an old tradition is preserved. The meaning of such rituals is not that England lives in the past. Rather, the country knows how to turn historical rites into a modern ceremony. For one person, it is a beautiful celebration. For another, a strange relic. And for a third, a reminder of how many of today's symbols grew out of practices that once had a very different meaning. Stonehenge leads even further into the past. UNESCO lists it as a World Heritage Site and describes it as an outstanding prehistoric monument linked to the engineering, astronomical, and ritual concepts of ancient societies. The stones stand not merely as a backdrop for a photograph. They show that thousands of years ago people already needed organization, precise calculations, the transport of heavy blocks, and the ability to work toward a goal that could not be seen immediately. Next to this prehistoric circle lies a very different story: the Tower of London. Historic England considers it a complex historical site that has been a fortress, a palace, a prison, and part of the state system. Today, the tourist sees stone walls and the crown jewels, but behind the striking architecture remains the memory of power, imprisonment, violence, and control. That is precisely why English landmarks are best perceived not as a collection of beautiful facades. Almost every place has a second layer. Behind the castle, a struggle for power. Behind the garden, changes in land ownership. Behind the museum, imperial history. Behind the old underground station, a solution that was once considered the future. But history does not pay the rent. If a person comes to England not for a week but for years, the postcard quickly turns into a table of expenses. The main reason London seems unaffordable is housing. The price depends on the area, room size, condition of the building, transport, and how much time a person is willing to spend commuting. An apartment in the center can cost as much as a full salary, while a more affordable option outside the capital will require extra hours on a train or the underground. The Office for National Statistics publishes separate data on population and housing, and it clearly shows why the average figure rarely describes any individual's reality. A young professional, a family with a child, a pensioner, and a student live in different Englands even if they are in the same city. For one person, the main expense will be rent. For another, childcare. For a third, commuting. Public transport helps connect these areas, but it doesn't make life free. Transport for London uses contactless payment and daily caps, which make trips simpler, yet a regular route still becomes a noticeable line item in the budget. In other cities, prices and distances differ, but a car of one's own, repairs and fuel can also quickly change the calculation. The situation with groceries is similar. In supermarkets, there are premium chains, mid-range stores, and cheaper options. Many residents keep an eye on evening discounts for products with a short shelf life. This is not an exotic life hack, but an ordinary way to reduce expenses. A person can live in a country with a high average salary and still carefully look at the yellow stickers. England is not a country where everything is uniformly expensive. A village may be cheaper than London in rent, but more expensive in transport. A northern city may offer more space, but fewer well-paid jobs. A resort coastline is beautiful in summer, but seasonal work and heating in winter change the picture. Any conversation about the cost of living without specifying a place turns into too convenient a half-truth. This is especially important for those dreaming of moving. The English language, universities, jobs, cultural life, and a sense of historical stability do attract people from all over the world. But moving means not only a nice accent and walks along old streets. One has to sort out documents, housing, taxes, healthcare, banking rules, transport, and the right to work. And here another English paradox arises. A country famous for politeness can make you wait several weeks for an answer from a service, call different departments, and fill out forms where one wrong field sends you back to the beginning. A polite tone does not guarantee a quick result. Sometimes a person receives a very polite letter saying that their problem has not gone away yet. Nevertheless, England continues to attract, not only with London and the royal family, but with the opportunity to live near strong universities, museums, parks, football clubs, theaters, and international communities. For some, a career matters. For others, their children's education. For some, the chance to get from a museum to the coast in one weekend, and from the coast to green hills. I believe that England's appeal does not rest on perfection. It rests on a recognizable order, inside which it is allowed to be different. Here, you can keep an old ceremony and at the same time argue with it. Love football and not stand a noisy pub. Live in a modern neighborhood and every day walk past a building older than your own country. England knows how to turn inconvenience into tradition, changeable weather into conversation, a queue into a moral rule, a pub into a social institution, tea into a pause, an old tap into a historic feature, a swan into a ceremony, stones into proof that the past can survive thousands of years. But this ability to explain one's own habits beautifully sometimes hides problems. Politeness does not cancel class inequality. History does not cancel the colonial legacy. A pub does not cancel loneliness. A high salary in statistics does not cancel expensive rent. The legendary transport system does not cancel delays. And green hills do not cancel the fact that farmers and small towns depend on a complex economy. So the real England is not only white cliffs, tea, and royal jewels. It is a person who checks the forecast early in the morning, then rides in a crowded carriage, in the evening stands in a queue, argues about football, buys discounted groceries, and still finds time to stop by a pub or call family. It is a country where an ancient stone may stand next to a technology hub and a conversation about the weather, alongside a discussion of world politics. Where on one street they sell pies by an old recipe, and on the next a restaurant of a cuisine opens that people from another part of the planet brought here. So what do we see when the tourist tour ends? We see an England that does not try to fully part with its past, but also cannot live by it alone. It preserves monarchical ceremonies because they create a sense of continuity. It loves football because through it, it experiences community. It drinks tea because a pause sometimes matters more than speed. It says sorry because shared life requires small gestures that soften the constant clash of people. And at the same time, it is an expensive, dense, heterogeneous country where the dream of a calm life depends on the district, income, transport, and the ability to endure a gray, rainy Monday. England does not promise that everything will be easy. It simply knows how to serve complexity in a beautiful cup, behind a stone wall, and with a very polite explanation. If this episode helped you see England as more than just a land of fog and red buses, write in the comments what surprised you the most. The culture of sorry, the queue rules, the swans on the Thames, English football, the cuisine, Stonehenge, or the cost of living in London. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. In the next journey, we will once again look at a country beyond the postcard, to a place where the most ordinary habits reveal as much about the past as royal palaces do.